Good morning, everybody. I've been telling you about this story that I wanted to read to you. It's actually a true story by Ben Carson. And so I just wanted to read maybe a chapter per day to you all. And so here we go. This is Gifted Hands. It says, The true life story of a boy who went from class dummy to brilliant pediatric neurosurgeon. This is written by Greg Lewis and Deborah Shaw Lewis, the Ben Carson story. So, this is a really interesting story about a man who overcame a great deal of adversity. And so, I'm hoping that you will find encouragement and maybe a desire to make plans for your future and then carry those plans out by listening to what he overcame. So, I'm going to read one chapter to you today, and then I'll read another chapter tomorrow. All right. Keep on going through the table of contents. Here we go. Broken home, shattered dreams. I hope this is recording, by the way. I think it is. All right. Broken home, shattered dreams. For a long time, Ben had sensed that something was wrong. He had not heard his parents scream or shout at one another for days. He seldom even heard them argue. Instead, they would just quit talking to each other until the whole house filled with a deep and disturbing quiet. Those silences gradually became longer and more frequent. His father seemed to be gone more and more. Yet Ben was still surprised by his mother's announcement. It started like any other day for 8-year-old Ben Carson and his 10-year-old brother Curtis. But it turned unforgettably sad when their mother sat them down and announced, Boys, your father has moved out of the house. He's not going to be living with us anymore. I don't want him to leave, Ben cried. Please make him come back. But his mother shook her head. Benny, your father can't come back. Why not? Ben wanted to know. He's done some bad things. And that was as much as she would tell Ben and Curtis. Ben argued with his mother. If Daddy did something wrong, why can't you just forgive him and let him come home? It's not that simple, she replied, looking like she was about to cry. Ben wondered if he'd done something to make his father angry, but Ben's mother assured him that his daddy loved him very much and was not mad at him at all. Still, it hurt. Ben's heart was broken. He loved his daddy. Every night he prayed for his father to come home so their family would be together again. But that never happened. When he left, Ben's father took all of his family's money, including the nest egg. Ben's mother had managed to store it by scrimping and saving over the years. Mrs. Carson had no job skills or work experience, so the only way she could support herself and her two sons was by cleaning houses and taking care of other people's children. It was hard work, but she was determined to do whatever it took to provide for her boys. Even after he learned the truth, Ben continued to love his father in spite of what he had done. But Ben loved and respected his mother even more. He knew how hard she worked to take care of him and Curtis and how much his father's actions had hurt his mother. Sonia Carson, Ben's mother, had been born into a large and extremely poor rural Tennessee family. She was the next to the youngest of 24 children, yet she only knew 13 of her siblings because she spent most of her lonely and unhappy childhood moving from one foster home to another. She had been just 13 years old when she met and married Ben's father, an older man who promised to rescue her from her sad situation and take her north to Detroit. He promised to provide her with a life of wealth and adventure. Ben's father was a charming man and a good provider. He loved parties and seemed proud of his young wife. He often bought Ben's mother expensive gifts of clothing and jewelry. Ben's father seemed to spend money as fast as he earned it. Over time, Ben's mother became concerned about their finances. After the boys were born, Ben's mother wondered where her husband was getting his extra money. She worried that he might be involved in selling alcohol or even drugs. She finally found out that he had another wife and family, and Sonia told him to leave. Ben found it tough to give up his hopes for a family home where his family could all live together again. But the same year his father left, a new dream entered Ben's life. Ben's dream was born one Sunday morning during church. Ben sat on the edge of the pew, listening intently as their minister told an exciting true story about a missionary doctor. Robbers were chasing the doctor and his wife, the minister told him. They ran as fast as they could around trees and over rocks, trying to stay ahead of their pursuers. Then they came to the edge of a cliff. They had nowhere to go. But, right at the very brink of the precipice, They spotted a crack in the rock just big enough for both of them to crawl into. When the bandits got to the cliff, their would-be victims were nowhere to be seen. It was as if the doctor and his wife had vanished. The robbers didn't know what to think. They stomped around, cursing, then left. The missionaries were safe. As the story ended, Ben breathed a sigh of relief. What a thrilling life missionaries must lead. God hid his missionaries in the cleft of the rock, the pastor explained, and he will do the same for you if you will give him your heart and let him protect you from harm. That's what I need, thought Ben. So, when the preacher invited those who wanted to give their lives to Jesus to come forward, Ben walked down the aisle to where the minister was standing. After listening to that exciting story, Ben knew two things. He wanted Jesus to watch over him, and he knew what he wanted to do with his life. I know what I'll be when I grow up, Ben told his mother as they walked home from church that day, a missionary doctor. His mother stopped to look right at him. Benny, she said, if you ask the Lord for something and believe he will do it, it will happen. His mother's encouraging response confirmed the dream for him. From that time on, Ben was convinced that God wanted him to be a doctor one day. Somehow he held on to that dream despite many other difficult things that would happen in his young life. And if you notice, though, there's these three little look like stars. They're called asterisks. This lets you know that a little time has passed. So when you see that, you just know that either the time has changed or maybe a scene has changed. So let's see what happens here. Excuse me. Since Ben's father was no longer providing any money, Sonia had to work longer and longer hours, holding 2 or 3 jobs at a time. Many mornings she left before dawn and wouldn't get home until her sons were already asleep. Sometimes 2 or 3 days would go by without Ben or Curtis even seeing their mother. Her exhausting schedule, the pain and sadness she felt about the end of her marriage, the heavy responsibility of raising 2 boys alone, and her own fear and uncertainty about the future all added up to an overwhelming feeling of discouragement and depression. Sonia often worried she might not be strong enough to make it on her own. Sometimes she wasn't sure she could go on another day. Eventually, a few months after Ben's father had left, Sonia decided she needed help. She told the boys, I have to go away for a few days to see some relatives. Are we going too? Ben wanted to know. No, Benny, she said, I have to do this alone. Besides, you boys need to go to school. So I've made arrangements for you. Sister Scott, an elderly woman they knew from church, stayed at their house and took care of Ben and Curtis. Just until I come back, their mother told them. Sonia made it sound like a special adventure, and the boys enjoyed spending time with Sister Scott. She was a terrific listener who would focus on whatever the boys told her and would exclaim, Oh my, every other sentence or so. One day, Sister Scott found out that Ben and Curtis wanted to learn how to roller skate. I can teach you, she told them, and she strapped on a pair of old-fashioned one-size-fits-all skates, the kind that fit onto one's shoes and are adjusted with a metal key. Then she gave the boys a demonstration. They created a sensation in the neighborhood, an 80-year-old woman skating up and down the sidewalks of Detroit with 2 boys in tow. Ben and Curtis had all they could do to keep up with her. They thought, if an old lady like her can roller skate, we can too. And before long, they could. The boys never really wondered why their mother made a number of those visits to relatives over the next few months. Not until they were adults did Ben and Curtis learn that those special occasions when her mother went away were actually times she felt so overwhelmed by life that she would temporarily check herself into a mental hospital to get treatment for depression and emotional stress. Then, when she felt capable of coping with life again, she'd check out and her sons would welcome her home. Life would go on after each trip. Every summer included one day at the Michigan State Fair. Sonia would save just enough money to pay for their admission so Ben and Curtis could take in the arts and crafts, agriculture, livestock, and educational exhibits. But they never had enough money to pay for tickets to any of the Midway rides. The boys could only watch other children on the rides and listen to the high-pitched screams as the children were tossed and spun and whirled into the air. Ben especially liked watching children riding in the bumper cars, banging into each other and laughing. For years, he dreamed of driving one himself and tried to imagine what that would be like. Over time, Ben learned that he could find enjoyment by imagining many things. He had never flown on an airplane or seen a luxury cruise ship or been inside a limousine or even eaten in a sit-down restaurant. but he learned that his imagination could create vivid pictures of what such experiences would be like. Sonia Carson continued struggling to pay her bills and care for her sons. As the months passed, it became clear that there was no way they could afford to stay in their Detroit home. To save money, Ben's mother decided to move her little family to Boston, Massachusetts. They would live with her older sister and brother-in-law, Ben's Aunt Jean and Uncle William Avery. Sonia explained to the boys that they would rent out their house in Detroit for enough money to cover the monthly mortgage payments. That way, when times got better, she had saved enough money, they would move back into their home on Deacon Street. Okay, well, that's the end of this chapter, and we will read tomorrow